First thing I want to ask you is, what are your thoughts about this today?
Well, I'm thrilled for the Reeds. I'm thrilled for Trevor. He's free. He will now be able to get the medical care that he needs because apparently he might be having tuberculosis. He had some other injuries. He'll be with his family, so it's all super. And I'm disappointed because Paul Whelan isn't coming home today. And from where I'm sitting, there are fewer options for his release to happen now.
You know, we've been talking about your brother for several years now. And I think he's into the 13th or close to the 1300th day or something like that.
Yeah, 12/16 today.
Yeah. So, you know, that was a lot longer than Trevor Reed was in custody. So I can understand why you're asking perhaps yourself or others, you know, when does his turn come and why wasn't, you know, he a bit further up the chain there? But have you gotten any understanding from the government about why this took place the way it did?
No, we don't get any information about those sorts of activities, trades, or concessions, or anything like that. And I guess I would look at it a little bit differently because I think there's a fairness element of first in, first out that would suggest that, well, maybe Paul should have come back first. But I think it's difficult to take that approach because each case is unique. And so while we obviously would have loved to have Paul come home today, I think it really depends on the unique characteristics or concessions that the government's willing to make in a particular case. So, I'm disappointed, but I don't feel at all that Trevor sort of nipped ahead.
Yeah, well, to be honest and to be clear about this, I'm not suggesting that anything wrong was done in bringing Trevor home first, and not trying to put you in that situation. My question is purely just, how do you feel about this? Because yes, Paul was there for a longer period of time, but throw that out the window because it is what it is, and Trevor's home, Paul's not. Where do you go from here?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I think one of the challenges we've got now is what concessions can the U.S. government make to get people released, whether it's in Russia or whatever. And there are clearly lines now, maybe a little bit better delineated with Russia about what the U.S. government is willing to do. They were willing to trade Yaroshenko for Trevor, which is great, except that the Russians have wanted Yaroshenko for the last 3.25 years that Paul's been there. So why didn't they make that trade earlier? Why didn't they get Paul out using Mr. Yaroshenko? They made President Biden referred to difficult decisions today. And clearly doing an exchange for Mr. Boot was a decision he wasn't willing to make. You aren't going to exchange the merchant of death for an American tourist. So in a sense, now we've got fewer concessions available. Mr. Boot's off the table. Mr. Yaroshenko's gone home. What can the American government use in order to spring people like Paul from their hostage situations?
Yeah. What kind of contact do you have with the government? I've asked you this question probably a dozen times over the last couple of years, and I'm just wondering if anything's changed because, there was a different president when we first started talking about this, and I'm sure the response was different than this one. But what kind of interaction are you having with the U.S. government about your brother?
Well, it took a long time to get started right at the beginning. And then ever since then, we have had a lot of low-level contact with American Citizen Services, staff in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Increasingly over the years, we've gotten access to higher parts of the administration or other parts of the government. And so that's been useful. My sister speaks regularly with the Special Presidential Envoy's Office on hostage affairs. But there's still that gap sort of right to the end, right to the decision makers of, how do you advocate all the way up that chain if you can't get meetings with Secretary Blinken, or you can't get meetings with National Security Advisor Sullivan, or in the case of President Biden, who has still not met with any member of our family. He's a busy man. I understand that. But it becomes a challenge for us to know, is the lack of interaction or is the lack of information because nothing's going on, no activities happening, which is what really the first 2 years were like? Or is something actually going on and we just aren't privy to it? And that's a hard position to constantly be trying to figure out, which side of that coin you're on.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Have you had the opportunity to meet with the president or with either Blinken or Sullivan? And it looks as though the answer is no, based on what you just said. But the question I would ask is, have you and your family pursued that approach? Have you asked?
Yes, Elizabeth handles all of our government relations, and she has asked numerous times to meet with Jake Sullivan and also to meet with President Biden, and has submitted that request on social media today because we realize that these are hard decisions to make. It's not a matter of just returning Paul Whelan and make Paul Whelan's family happy. The president is responsible for all American citizens, and by doing any sort of an exchange, as you and I have talked about in the past, you are essentially turning an American citizen into currency. And there is now a value to arresting or detaining more American citizens in order to make those sorts of trades. So I totally get that there is a decision-making challenge for the president, but it would be useful, even if it wasn't President Biden, for other people in the government to let us know that. Give us realistic expectations about what's likely to happen, what's off the table. And so we can get a sense of, are we really in this for another 13 years? That's how much Paul has on his sentence, assuming that the Russians don't just arbitrarily lengthen it. So I think that's a frustration on a day like today. We see someone come home and we don't really have any sense of where we are. We're totally at sea.
Yeah, it's a difficult position that you and your family are in. And as I've said on many occasions before, I'm really sorry that you're in this situation.
Appreciate it.
How is Paul doing based on what you know?
Well, physically, he's doing all right. We were able to put a lot of money in before the sanctions hit and before the war started, Russia's invasion in Ukraine. And so that money has been allowing him to continue to buy fresh fruits and vegetables in the prison, to make phone calls to our parents. So I think in general, he's in a good shape there. It's mentally, I think, where probably he's pretty cracked today. My parents called him and spoke to him, and their news was Trevor Reed's been released. And his first question was, why have I been left behind? And how do you respond to that? I mean, even if you're an arm's length government official, how do you respond to that? But how do your elderly parents deal with that with their son? So I think mentally he's probably struggling right now to wonder, well, when is life going to change for him?